The work that all of us do for educational equity is situated within the larger context of educational disparities in our country, states, communities, and school systems. These contexts include glaring disparities in student access, participation, and outcomes. As some examples of access and achievement disparities, we know that students who are culturally and linguistically diverse are more likely than white students to attend high-poverty schools where the turnover rate for teachers is highest. Curricular tracking and ability grouping continue to disproportionately place racially diverse and economically disadvantaged students on lower academic tracks. Students with limited English proficiency may experience dropout when not provided with appropriate language support services. Students from racial minority backgrounds are also more likely to be placed in special education than their white peers, particularly in the so-called subjective disability categories of learning disabilities, mild mental retardation, and emotional disturbances. This is a map that we created based on data from the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. It shows that African American students are about twice as likely to be placed in special education in these high incidence categories in states like California, Oregon, New Mexico, and Colorado, and have about the same probability of being placed in special education in only 10 states in the United States. When we see trends like this, we have to dig deeper to ask what is going on that contributes to these outcomes. This table shows emerging evidence that students labeled as limited English proficient in the Southwest, including California and Arizona, are subject to overrepresentation in special education, potentially due to inappropriate identification. There are many disparities nationally in education outcomes by race, ethnicity, and gender. For example, Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans continue to be suspended, expelled, and retained at higher rates than white students. SCIBA found that CLD students tend to be the recipients of such punitive practices at a much higher rate than cultural and language majority students. Punitive and reactive disciplinary measures have been linked to the increased severity and incidence of the behaviors they are implemented to eliminate. One of the risks associated with increased severity of problem behaviors is increased referral of students for special education evaluation due to suspected emotional behavior disorders, EBD. Such an increase in referrals may lead to an increase in students identified as EBD whose problem behavior, if managed differently by schools, may have been reduced rather than exacerbated. Data show that females now perform comparable to or better than males on many indicators of academic achievement, particularly in reading and writing, and they are less likely to be retained, drop out, or engage in risky behaviors like drug use and peer violence. However, males continue to perform better in math and science. Although the gap is shrinking, female students are less likely to be enrolled in some AP courses and tend to perform less well on AP exams. The gap in athletics participation also persists. Despite remarkable issues that must be addressed, including continued disparities in access to athletics and other programs, sexual harassment, hate crimes, and discriminatory treatment of pregnant students in some schools. Schools must promote positive, safe learning environments, recognizing that harassment, bullying, and violence interfere with students' right to learn in an environment free of discrimination, which can threaten their well-being and hinder educational achievement. Now let's take a look at how these disparities are playing out in the equity context of California. In this chart, you can see what access looks like in California. The blue represents public school enrollment. The orange represents participation in gifted and talented programs. And the green represents the amount of students suspended. This slide shows the differences in what achievement looks like across racial groups. When you look at the California State Assessment, the California Standards Test, as compared to the National Assessment of Educational Progress at the 5th grade level. Although the subject areas vary slightly, the CST test is in English Language Arts, while the NAEP is in reading. If you look only at CST results, you see that 9% of Latino and Latina students fell at the advanced level on this assessment. But when you look at the NAEP, 1% of the students earned scores that place them in the advanced category. This slide shows the racial disproportionality in special education eligibility in California. Again, blue representing total enrollment, and orange representing the percentage of students in special education. Here's another way of looking at racial disproportionality in special education settings in California. Look for a moment at the percentage of African American students, Latino students, white students, Asian students, and Native American students in special education population. If you look at the second pie chart, it shows the same information, but it stratifies it even more, showing students who are in the general education classroom less than 40% of the day. Finally, in looking at outcomes in California, you can see what the on-time high school graduation rates looked like in 2003. You can also see the percentage obtaining certificate of high school completion or attendance for male and female students. We think Hillary Clinton summed it up nicely back in 1969 during a college graduation speech when she asserted, "To be educated, the goal of it must be human liberation. Liberation enabling each of us to fill our own capacity so as to be free to create within and around ourselves."